views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Straight ahead on this edition of Perspectives, it's a day that many people may not know about. It's called Constitution Day. What exactly is it? How do we celebrate it? And what do you need to know about the Constitution? That plus the talk of politics is straight ahead on this edition of Perspectives with yours truly, Darren Hyme.
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective which shines a light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life. What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective?
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Darren Hyme, and of course, we invite you to stay connected to us here at Perspectives. You can do a couple of things. You can stay connected to us here at the show by checking us out on our social media site. You can go to us at Facebook and BronxNet Perspectives. Then also hit us up on Twitter. There you'll be able to find out about some past episodes of the show. You can comment about today's episode and tell us also what you like to see, because it's important that you share your perspective with us. Coming up on this edition, we are going front and center with Constitution Day. Did you know the United States has a Constitution Day? What exactly does it mean? Well, we're glad to have joining with us our sister, our friend, Dr. Gloria Brown Marshall, who is the professor of constitutional law at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She is also the author of the book, The United States Constitution and African American Context, and we'll throw that up on the screen in a few minutes, but she's here once again to share a little bit with us. You've seen her on BronxNet, you've seen her on Perspectives, and she's even made her way to CNN. And so, like I tell you, thank you again for coming and making time for us little people over here on the other side of the Bronx.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it every time.
Thank you. So listen, let's talk a little bit about this. Constitution Day is a very important day in the United States. However, many people don't even know it exists.
Well, it began as Citizenship Day. Mm-hmm. Back in 1940, Congress decided that we should have some day recognizing citizenship, especially since so many people had immigrated into the country. And so it began as this naturalization day, so people who were naturalized citizens would then start thinking about what it meant to be a citizen. And what I like to look at is the fact that all of these things that were happening to people of color as they fought to get their full rights under the Constitution were taking place at the same time that Congress was putting into place things that would kind of make people recognize that they are citizens and what those responsibilities and obligations are to being a citizen. So you had these two things happening at the same time. Remarkably, the Civil Rights Movement and this movement around Citizenship Day and Constitution Day were happening in parallel universes.
So walk us through how it comes into existence and how we celebrate today.
Okay. It came into existence based on this idea that we have a lot of immigrants coming in the 1940s and 50s. Do they know what it means to be an American citizen? It was almost part of this assimilation process that we have in this country. And so there were Congress people who said we should have some proclamation. It wasn't official yet. It was a proclamation that one day would be Citizenship Day. And that day first was in May. Then they moved it to September 17th, 1787, because that's the day that the Constitution was drafted and it's signed off. So they said, well, since September 17th, 1787 was the day the Constitution technically began, let's make September 17th Constitution Day. So Citizenship Day and Constitution Day were on these parallel paths, and with the Civil Rights Movement, with the influx of immigrants, all of this was taking place at the same time.
We talk about the Constitution, but in America, how many people are really, from your perspective, well-versed on the Constitution? It's a major part of American history. It's a legal document. But yet and still, when you talk to a lot of people, they really don't even know much about it.
And that's why when I teach constitutional law, my students in my 203 class, 200 level class, sophomores, juniors, we actually read the Constitution. We read it. We start with the preamble, we the people, and we go all the way through it. And it's a remarkable document. It is, as you pointed out, American history. You can see the ebb and flow of rights and restrictions. You can see what was happening in the nation, all the way from slavery issues to women's rights. You see all these issues around young people. When young people wanted to vote, and the voting age was 21, and they protested and got it down to 18. All these things you see as you read the Constitution. But as you pointed out, very few people actually read it. Even lawyers. They look at maybe the Equal Protection Clause or the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, maybe particular clauses, but rarely do they actually read the document, as American history.
Of all the articles in the Constitution and the amendments, which one sticks out the most to you?
I think it would have to be the Equal Protection Clause, as far as the fact that within it is so much history. The 14th Amendment, 1868, that means that the Equal Protection Clause was created for the newly freed Africans and then applied to everyone else. So we're looking at 1868. The Civil War is ended. Abraham Lincoln has been assassinated. We have this whole political process going on. We have what's taking place in the South with Reconstruction. All that is going on. And so within the 14th Amendment, we have citizenship at birth, because people take for granted that we have citizenship at birth in this country. Not every country has that. We have also, as I pointed out, the Equal Protection Clause, which means you don't have to be a citizen to be equally protected under law. And we have the Due Process Clause. We have all these things taking place in this one amendment of the Constitution.
And when you talk about citizens not having to necessarily be a citizen to be protected by the law, we see a lot of immigrants, we see a lot of people come here, and they're granted that great protection, if you will, by the United States government. Of all the ones of amendments in the Constitution, which one strikes you the most in terms of questionable?
Questionable. One of the major questions we have in my class is within the Article 2, I should say, of the executive powers for the president. In order to be president, this is the only instance that one must be a natural-born citizen. You could be a Supreme Court justice. You could be a U.S. senator, a U.S. representative. You can hold any office, but you must be a natural-born citizen in order to be president of the United States. So the thing that really is, I think, is somewhat of a hypocrisy is that when they tell kids, you can be anybody you want to be, even president, but not if you weren't born in this country.
And we know that was a big issue between President Barack Obama and then also Donald Trump, fighting to find out whether or not he was actually born a citizen of the United States.
But nobody even thought about that John McCain, who was running against President Obama at the time, was born in the Panama Canal Zone. So the question was, do you have to be born on this soil to be a natural-born citizen? Because he wasn't. He was born in Panama.
So that could have brought another thing. And nobody really brought that out either.
No, not at all. So all these questions, and then the other thing about the Constitution itself, once again, that 14th Amendment, it was with the 14th Amendment in 1896, in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, that this country decided to embrace apartheid, legal segregation of the races. It was with that same constitutional amendment, 14th Amendment, in 1954, that Brown versus Board of Education ended segregation in public schools. So you have the same amendment, but it's interpreted by those 9 justices of the Supreme Court. And that's the other part of this. What role these 9 people play, these U.S. Supreme Court justices, in our lives day to day. But we talk about what the president is doing, we talk about Congress, but rarely do we examine the lives of the U.S. Supreme Court justices and how their decisions affect us on a daily basis.
And when we do come back after the break, and we're not taking one now, we'll talk in a few seconds, I do want to talk after the break about one Supreme Court justice who made a visit right here and what her impact actually is. I already gave it away because I said her impact is, and what her impact has been. The 3/5 rule.
Yes.
Something that African Americans and Americans alike have spoken a lot about with the Constitution. First, give our viewers an understanding of the 3/5 understanding. And then second of all, why hasn't this been changed?
Well, here's the thing that I think is great about our Constitution. I spent 3 months as an exchange scholar in England. And while I was there, I was studying their Constitution, so to speak. The United States has the longest standing Constitution of any country on the planet. We have the longest standing Constitution. But here is the problem. Other countries, when they amend the Constitution, they take that part out. In our Constitution, we repeal it, but we leave the words in. Therefore, you can watch the trail of history by reading the Constitution. The 3/5 rule is in Article 1 of the Constitution, which states that people of African descent will be counted as 3/5 of a person in order to determine the number of U.S. Congress people. So when we look at our districts and we look at the population, how do you decide based on this population if you have slaves there, if they're going to be counted as a full person or not a person at all, since they weren't considered people under law? It was decided they would be considered 3/5 of a person. And because that happened and we don't remove that language from the Constitution, you can go back and read it today and see that at one point, people of African descent in this country were counted as 3/5 of a person in order to determine the number of U.S. representatives in Congress.
We hear people talk all this time. You're violating my constitutional rights. You know, this is a violation of my constitutional rights. But the thing that always trips me out is like, people only know one or two of the constitutional rights, yes, and they really don't know the other ones. What would happen if we were really so forceful about the other constitutional rights as we were the simple ones that we always hear people say in these YouTube videos?
But you know what? Even the simple ones we hear people say, church and state. This is the difference between church and state. The words church and state are not in the Constitution. What they're looking at is the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, that Congress shall not establish a religion. So that's the Establishment Clause means that since this country does not have an established religion, that if you see a situation in which a governmental entity is putting out, you know, a crucifix or, you know, putting forth some chant from Buddha or whatever it might be, that it's establishing religion and therefore violating that clause in the First Amendment. So there's this distinction between church and state is the Establishment Clause, but people don't even know where that is, and they don't know it that way. Even the Free Exercise Clause, which is also in the First Amendment, no one talks about, which allows people to have the freedom to exercise their religion, but then they never think about you can only exercise it as long as it doesn't violate somebody else's freedom of exercising their religion or freedom of speech. There are limits to constitutional rights. The Constitution doesn't give somebody a blank check to go out and do whatever they want to do because they say that's my right to do so.
Interesting news there. So, Dr. Gloria Brown-Marshall.
For some, it is very much for some, because some people actually believe that the Constitution is a blank check.
No, and you hear people think that, do it, and sometimes even act on it, hoping that it'll pass when they get to court, only to find out it doesn't work. Got to take a quick break, talk more with Dr. Gloria Brown-Marshall. We're going to continue in the second segment talking about a Supreme Court justice making her way to our area, her impact and what that actually means as a Supreme Court justice for us as a group of people, as a community, and what exactly does a Supreme Court justice do in your life? We'll be right back.
A single ember that escapes from a wildfire can travel more than a mile. You can't control where that ember will land, only what happens when it does. Get Fire Adapted now at fireadapted.org.
I already knew that I was going to go to college, you know, from a young age. I definitely want to major in political science. After that, I'm going to get my law degree. Then I'm going to come back to Detroit, boost the economy, become the mayor or something, try to make the situation better for other people. I feel like I owe it to the city. I'm determined. It's going to happen. My name is Justin, and I am your dividend.
I grew up in the housing projects of Cleveland. I didn't even know that life could be any better than it was. Education for me has been a way to get away from the agony of what was normal life. I want to be able to impact the community, not just look back on where I came from, but to reach back to where I came from and pull some people up with me. My name is David, and I am your dividend.
People think I'm trash, but they're wrong. Today I'm just an aluminum can, but one day I could be a stadium.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
And we're back here on Perspectives. Darren Hyman here with you, and we're joined by Dr. Gloria Brown Marshall, Professor of Constitutional Law, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, right here in New York City. And talking with the doctor a little bit about Supreme Court. We talked a little bit about Constitution first segment and the Supreme Court. Knowing what Supreme Court justices actually do and the effect that they have on an American's day-to-day life. Recently, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who's been right here in the broader Bronx for years, made her way to your establishment. Talk to us about her and her impact as a Supreme Court justice.
Well, she's the first Latina on the court. And because we have women before, the first, the woman was Sandra Day O'Connor, we had a Supreme Court justice. Since that time, we've had Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then Sonia Sotomayor, and then after that, Justice Kagan. So to have these women on the court, I mean, that's amazing to have 3 women on the court, but to have a woman who is from the Bronx, a woman who is here, who grew up in public housing in the Bronx, in a single-family household, and she wrote about it in her book. And so when she wrote about her beloved life and the life that she lived growing up in the Bronx, not far from Yankee Stadium, the whole sense of it is she wanted young people to feel a security in themselves, to understand that just because their parents might be single parents or broke, or if they might be in public housing, or the language barrier should not stop them from reaching for the stars. And that's why I admire her so much as a person. Then you take that and you put that same energy, that intellect, growing up there and going on to Ivy League schools and everything that she did, being a judge, and you see that the background of a person is also something that comes into their interpretation of the Constitution, even though they're not robots and they're supposed to act like they are, but they couldn't be. So you have conservative members of the Supreme Court as well who bring in their background in making decisions and interpreting the Constitution that creates the law that we all live with day to day.
You look and analyze law all the time. From your perspective, when you look at the work that she's done thus far, how would you grade her?
Here we have with affirmative action. I was kind of I will say, taken aback. I thought she would have taken a firmer approach regarding affirmative action in the beginning of her years on the court, but she's only been on the court of, a relatively short time. She's the newest justice. Well, Kagan is the newest justice now, but she's a relatively new justice. So initially she was a little conservative when it came to these social justice issues, but now I think she's taken a greater stance. We know Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is very powerful when it comes to women's issues, but we also are beginning to see B+, A-, I would grade Justice Sotomayor when it's coming to the racial justice issues, because she's beginning to see the conservatism on the court that and I watch the court. I report on the court. I'm part of the U.S. Supreme Court press pools, so I'm there on a number of occasions. So it's interesting to watch the justices as they are hearing these oral arguments and to see them respond to some of the things that are said in court, because just like the Shelby County case dealing with the Voting Rights Act, and to see how divided they are when it comes to racial justice and social justice issues is quite amazing. So I give her a B+, A- right now. I can see her even being stronger in her stance when it comes to social justice issues. And even though they call it liberal, I call it traditional, because the tradition under the Constitution is supposed to be fairness to all people. And we know, even though this great experiment made up of so many people from so many different backgrounds is one that is ongoing experiment on how we all get along based on constitutional rights, etc. But I think under the Constitution, Justice Sotomayor is starting to see that she needs that strong stance in order to protect the rights of people without a voice.
Do we see her as a major power player going down the years?
We see her as a major power player. But the other thing we're going to have to see, you need 5 votes. In order to be the majority in these Supreme Court decisions, she's going to have to not just be a power player, but she's going to have to take some lessons from Justice Kagan, who is also a local New York person. And Justice Kagan learned you have to build a consensus. So if you have this strong voice in Justice Sotomayor and you have this consensus building in Justice Kagan come together, that's a power couple on the court.
We'll see how that works out. Take a quick break. When we come back after the break, we're going to ask about President Barack Obama and the Constitution. The constitutional powers of a president in this upcoming possible impending war.
Know what?
What?
Since I got adopted, I've learned a lot about these humans.
I know. I mean, check out these two. It's Flirt City over here.
Yeah, I noticed that. It looks like my human is definitely into your human.
Oh, look! I think she's getting his number.
Nice.
Your human's got some sweet moves.
Takes after his dog. Oh, look, they're doing that thing where they put their arms around each other.
She kicked up a leg. It's like in the movies.
That's awesome. Looks like we're gonna be hanging out a little bit more.
Being a dad can be tough.
No. What do you mean she's not coming?
When's the fairy princess coming?
Any minute now.
But when you're willing to do anything...
It is I, Cruz Zinkerbell. Okay, time for cake.
It's always worth it.
I know it's really you, Drew. I'm just pretending for the other kids.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today. Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov.
Look at me. Hey.
Raymond, look at Mommy.
Maybe the light hurts his eyes.
Maybe she's just not hungry. Maybe he can't hear us. Maybe we're not stimulating him enough. Maybe it's a phase.
Avoiding eye contact is one early sign of autism. Learn the others today. The sooner it's diagnosed, the better.
All right, give me a spot. You know my motto, safety first.
They could be dangerous. I think we should call animal control.
Animal control?
To be safe.
Don't worry.
Just...
I got this. It's a new motto.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
And welcome back. We continue our conversation with Dr. Gloria Brown Marshall, who is the professor of constitutional law at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. She's also the author of the book, The U.S. Constitution, an African American Perspective. We encourage you to get it. It's a small book, but it's a great read, and it puts some things into context so we can better understand African American history in the context of the Constitution, and she does a good job of bringing that all together. Speaking of the Constitution, I wanted to talk to you about President Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. We know about ISIS and the situation with Iraq, Syria. The question becomes about the president and using constitutional power to be able to legislate, going to war, decisions being made. Give us your perspective on the president's constitutional power, because some people are of the mindset that he really doesn't have the power. Other people say, yes, he does.
Well, there's been this ongoing debate as to whether or not President Barack Obama has overstepped his bounds that have been formulated, of course, under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, what he can and cannot do. Because he's been blocked so often in Congress, he's used his executive power, which means he can sign under his name and make law. But Congress, under Article 1 of the Constitution, funds the laws. Congress is the one in control of the budget, of the purse strings. So at this time we have this conflict. What we have now is this battle with ISIS, and whether or not the president, as he stated, can send troops into danger. And those troops would be, you know, these missiles being sent from planes, no boots on the ground. But even a missile, a bomb, costs money. Congress has to fund that. So if the president has this mission, they call it mission creep, that he then sends people in, is he forcing the Congress to declare war by funding the people, because we don't want our troops to be put in harm's way. Right. So now there's been this issue, how far can the president push? How much can Congress fund? If Congress withholds the money, is putting troops in harm's way? Can the president do this in the first place? First and foremost, Congress declares war. The president is commander-in-chief. So that way, he can send troops in, but he can't keep them there over an extended period of time without some funding and without the support of Congress. So at this point, he has a right to do a little, but without Congress, he cannot do a lot.
So there's a possibility that he could send them in, but then also not be able to get the funding to be able to maintain that twisting his hand.
And it's happened so many times before. So many presidents have used their power to get troops in and then kind of use that as leverage to get the funding to keep them there. Because Congress does not want our troops to be in harm's way without the proper equipment and things that they need to protect themselves and get the mission accomplished. With this mission, it's not going to be a short-term mission. That's what Congress is afraid of. And therefore, they're going to be pushed into a war. And they're being forced to declare war because the president is leveraging his power to send in troops, and then only Congress can declare war, and hoping Congress would then support those troops in a way. But no one wants those troops to be there on the long term. But he wouldn't be the first president to end up in a war coming through the back door like that.
The president being sued is a big conversation that's been had about the possibility of him actually being sued. In your final comments, give us a little bit about how crazy a notion that you can see the Congress actually sue the President of the United States.
You know, Congress has within it the ability to bring lawsuits. They did so with the same-sex marriage issue. Remember, Congress had this bilateral committee that actually sued to support marriage being between only a man and a woman, and they lost before the U.S. Supreme Court. So we have these co-equal branches, the judicial branch under the Article 3 of the Constitution, the executive branch under Article 2, and the legislative branch vying for power all the time. So they can use these mechanisms like a lawsuit. I don't think they'll be very successful, but they're a way to symbolically show the displeasure with the president. It's not the first time. It won't be the last time that Congress has used lawsuits to show there's something the president is doing that they don't like.
Before we let you go, you were an analyst on CNN. Talk a little bit about the trial down in Ferguson, or not the trial, but the whole arrest in Ferguson, the hope of getting a trial, and the talk about the grand jury and the possibility that there's a grand jury indictment coming. Your take on this and where things are right now? Well,
September 17th is Constitution Day. And I really looked at this issue of protest with Constitution Day because of Ferguson. I looked at the fact that there's so many people of color who have worked so hard to make the promises in the Constitution a reality. And so I'm very concerned about what's happening to Ferguson now that the protests have died down. Will they get the justice they deserve? Will the prosecutor be vigorous in attempting to look at whether or not this officer, who was white, shot and killed without provocation an unarmed black teenager who was on his way to college? So all these things are going into this whole amalgam of what our constitutional rights are and how they play out on a day-to-day basis. I'm glad that Eric Holder is there to investigate. I think a federal investigation will give what is needed when it comes to this situation in Ferguson.
Dr. Gloria Brown-Marshall, thank you for coming and sharing with us here on Perspectives.
Thank you.
Dr. Gloria Brown-Marshall, our guest here on Perspectives. We invite you to stay connected to us. Share your perspective. You know how to hit us up on the networking sites, Facebook and Twitter. And, of course, you will get an opportunity to share. We'll get an opportunity to feed back to you. And we'll come back next week with another show, new issues, new perspective. Darren Jaime saying take care. God bless.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
What's on your mind? What's on your mind?
Let 'em know. Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables to speak on your decisions, cause in the long run it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light, cause it might make a difference in some